sovereignty of the Republic of Kenya. Went in as Linda Nchi and then morphed into AMISOM. We're speaking to Lt.Colonel David Wando, an officer who's been at the war front, now in charge of the environment portfolio in the Kenya Defence Forces, and he joins us as we speak about the war in Somalia. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Karibu sana.
Asante.
Let's begin with the pride of a soldier who is going into the war front to defend the sovereignty of the Republic of Kenya. How did you feel?
I will tell you, in the military, you are prepared for this from the moment you join cadet course, and that is at the Kenya Military Academy. All the training, all the education that you undergo is geared towards defense of the country. And so when a moment like this gets to you and you're called upon, it finds you ready. And it's a proud moment for a soldier, because this is not experiences that everybody gets to have. So for me, this was a proud moment to stand up and act in defense of the country.
You get to Somalia. What are your expectations once you get there?
Before we got to Somalia, you have to understand that our operations were majorly intelligence-led. And so we had some bit of information, and much of what we encountered was not really a surprise. And so I understood from the intelligence briefings that we had gotten and from the briefings that we had as a combat team that we were going to an area that was experiencing violent conflict, an area that was experiencing humanitarian crisis, and unfortunately that is exactly what we got. You're
going to get an enemy. Of course you have intelligence about them, but probably were there other things you didn't expect, obviously, in terms of operations and how the Al-Shabaab would react to your entry into Somalia?
Well, there are a few things. Like, for example, when we entered Somalia, the roads were virtually non-existent, and so this really hindered our movement, and we covered a distance of 42 kilometers in 8 days because we kept getting bogged down by poor road conditions. And you have to remember that this was during the rainy season. However, when we got to the objective, we fought well and we took the objective in no time.
This time it's Operation Linda Nchi. Yes. And you don't have any other force that is supporting except our own Kenya Defence Forces warding off the enemy. Tell us about the experience in this very first phase of a war.
So this, as a platoon commander then, even though I had been appointed as a second in command and the administration officer of the Bravo combat team going into Somalia. Prior to that, I had conducted several patrols and within the border for what we call close operations. And so I had a bit of experience engaging with Al-Shabaab. I had already had an encounter with them in a place called Damasa. And so, but this was now a full-blown war, you know, and we were going to protect the country. And so when we went there, we were up to scratch. Like I said, we were prepared, we have been preparing, we had trained, and so we were not playing a guessing game. We knew exactly what we wanted to do, and we were very clear about our objectives going into Somalia.
As a leader of a Bravo group, of course you're leading soldiers in this. The optimism of your officers, tell us a bit about that.
The morale is quite high, and the morale comes from the moral component. When the force believes in what it is doing and the country is behind you and we have the will to fight, then of course the morale was high. And each and every one of us, I can tell you this, were looking forward to attaining the objectives and accomplishing the mission that had been bestowed on us, that had been given to us. And so our morale was high, and it showed in our actions.
I remember that time, just as raised now, the amount of support you received from Kenyans as you went into Somalia. I'm just wondering about locals in Somalia. These are soldiers from Kenya coming into Somalia, obviously for stability, to stabilize this country. Is that how the locals felt? How were you received by the locals in Somalia?
War is a whole spectrum of not just using kinetic forces, but also winning the hearts and minds. And of course, this is a foreign force coming in for the first time, and you have some of the people who are a bit skeptical about what it is you're going to do. Is this one oppressive force replacing another, that is Al-Shabaab? But we had the opportunity to interact with the locals, and as you are aware, the Kenya Defence Forces conducted several civil military cooperation, and we offered aid to the civilians around the areas where we were deployed. And subsequently, we won hearts and minds, and the Somalis got to realize that our task there was not to oppress them, but rather to get rid of the oppressor.
Tell us about your alliances with the Somali National Army, or even the local enforcement in terms of law and order. How you were able to cooperate with them. Again, like I'm saying, there's a foreign force in the country, but then you're working towards the same goal. How did you cooperate?
Well, for the Somali National Army, you have to remember that we have also participated in their training. And so their modus operandi, if I may say that, is somewhat borrowed from the Kenya Defence Forces. And I have to say that we had quite a cordial relationship with them. We had a good understanding about how we would operate. We would cooperate in the various operations that we undertook with them. And I have to say, for the period that I was there, I actually saw them grow into conducting certain operations by themselves. Of course, initially they required the support of the Kenya Defence Forces, but as we conducted the operations and they learned from us, they got to understand how they could conduct some of them, and it was quite a pleasure working with them.
Initially, they appeared to be the target of Al-Shabaab attacks, even when our forces were inside Somalia. Most of the times you would hear what they have targeted are the camps of the Somali National Army. Probably you can tell us how you were able to create a hedge around them so that the attacks minimize on their end, and they're able to help you probably logistically or in one way or another to fight the Al-Shabaab.
So the thing about the attacks on the Somali National Army camps, you have to remember this, in my estimation, were approaches by Al-Shabaab, first of all, to exploit what they perceived as a gap. A gap in this instance is a weakness. So they thought that because the Somali National Army was still younger in the sense of when they were established and how long it took them to train, as compared to KDF, which was well equipped, well trained, they thought that they would exploit that gap and attack the weak point. And what we did is after every attack, we would do an assessment, we would make an assessment of where the weaknesses were, help the Somali National Army in improving their defenses, and subsequently they were able to repel the Al-Shabaab successfully.
A rough terrain, bad weather, and then you're dealing with an enemy probably who has been parading themselves around that terrain and probably understand it better than you do. How are you able to repulse them?
Well, as you have correctly pointed out, you are fighting on their home turf, and so there's a lot of catching up for the force to do. And for us, the learning curve was pretty steep, because we really had to adapt to the new operating environment and respond appropriately. And by response, I mean obtaining the correct kind of equipment. You'd find that maybe some of the equipment we went with were not suitable for the terrain, so we kept changing as we went along. And we also learned our enemy very fast, and we were able to adapt to a model that would repulse his way of fighting.
Is it about our equipment? Is it about the training of our soldiers? Are you able to do that quickly?
Yes, and you have to understand that flexibility is one of the principles of war. You have to be flexible and you have to adapt fast, because if you do not, then it means that you will always be a step behind the enemy, and you want the enemy to be a step behind you or several steps behind you. So for KDF, this was not really anything new for us, because again, I fall back to our training. Our training is such that we are taught to adapt and adapt fast. So our leadership, we would consistently have this line of communication where the troops in the front lines would give feedback that would go all the way to the leadership and inform the decisions that would subsequently be made, and that would have an impact on the operations on the ground. And that's how we were able to learn the Al-Shabaab, learn their tactics, adapt to the model of fighting, and surpass them even in their own terrain.
Are there instances where you found yourself having to change your methods of operation, or even, logistical operations, obviously owing to, how the Al-Shabaab is responding to your works in Somalia?
Yes, you have to understand that the enemy is also not static. The enemy is also trying to be innovative, to beat either your defenses or to beat your tactics. And so, for example, I will tell you, in the beginning, there were we would conduct our patrols in a certain way using vehicles, but then we realized that the Al-Shabaab had now acquired more powerful IEDs. And so what that would mean is we would study the terrain, and there are areas where we would disembark from the vehicles, do a foot clearance of the area, and then in other areas where we assess that the threat is not as bad, we would embark on the vehicles. And so this was one of the ways that we had changed our tactics to suit the threat that we were facing on the ground.
All right.
Yes.
And yet the most glorious moment was recapturing Kismayo from the hands of the Al-Shabaab. How did KDF operate, towards an operational base in terms of, the ones in control of the entire, Kismayo port, and then KDF recaptures it from the Al-Shabaab? Tell us about that experience and how you were able to achieve that as a Kenya Defence Forces.
Well, I can only speak of that from now a different angle, because you have to understand that Bravo Combat Team was operating in the northern sector, and Kismayo was taken in the southern sector. But this was a proud moment for not just the Kenya Defence Forces, but for Kenya as a whole, because I think the capture of Kismayo displayed to the region and the entire world that we have a capable force, a force that is capable to propagate good, not just in the region, but also through this action. We showed that we are professional, that we have well-trained soldiers, and we have modern-day equipment that can conduct such kind of operation. I'm sure you understand that there are very few successful beach landings that have happened in the world, and as a Kenya Defence Forces soldier, I have to say this is one of the successful beach landings in the entire world, not just in Africa, in the entire world. Yes.
Let's talk about your personal experience in a bit, and yours is a story of courage and overcoming, being a war hero. But let's talk about that particular day when the incident happened. You were in an IED attack?
Yes, I was in an IED attack. Okay. This happened on 27th of July 2012. And I remember on that day we were supposed to conduct a logistical run for one of our forward operating bases in Fafadun. So I had briefed my soldiers in the morning, and we had located a center called Shahad. This was approximately 35 kilometers away from Busar, and that was going to be our meeting center. Prior to this, of course, we kept changing our plans just in case anything had leaked, and we were sure that everything was watertight. And so on this particular day, after the briefing, we embarked on our journey now to go and meet the team from Fafadun, so that we could make the logistical exchanges. But this was also doubling up as a patrol.
And you have your soldiers in tow?
Yes, I had my soldiers in tow. Right. So this was a whole convoy of about 9 vehicles, including 2 from the Somali National Army. And so we set off on our journey, and like I'd said, the roads in Somalia were virtually non-existent by this point, and so there were several twists and turns. But I remember specifically when we were coming out of a certain thicket, and we were just about to enter a clearing, I heard this loud bang, and the next thing I knew is I could feel the vehicle had been lifted, and this was an armored personnel carrier, weighs several tons. It had been lifted off the ground, and we were slammed back onto the ground, and the cabin where I was seated was filled with soot and sand, and you could barely see anything.
Let me cut you short just a bit. This is how many minutes after you had left the area?
This was actually approximately 2 hours after we had left camp, because we left at around 0800 hours, and the incident was happening at around 10:35 hours. Okay. Yes. And so the as the soot and the dust had filled the cabin, my mind first of all raced to my driver, and things are happening lightning quick. Because at the same time I'm trying to look over at my driver, I can feel my soldiers disembarking from the vehicle. This is is what we call our ambush drills.
You're in this APC, and it is the one that you're in that is leading?
Yes, this was the command vehicle, and it was the one that was leading.
Okay.
So my soldiers disembark from the APC, and the dust settles enough for me to see my driver, and the first thing I ask him is, are you okay? The driver is called Sergeant Kito. So I ask him, Kito, are you okay? And he tells me he's okay. And he looks at me, just one look at me, and he opened the door and joined the other soldiers who were now engaging the al-shabaab that were deployed in this particular ambush. So I was later to find out that we had run into an ambush that was reinforced by an IED. Okay. So immediately after my driver left, I reached for the radio because I knew that the personnel at the end of the convoy possibly would not know or have knowledge of what was happening at the front. So I reached for the radio and radioed my sergeant. He's called Sergeant Maina. So I radioed Sergeant Maina, who was my second in command, and I briefly described the situation for him. And because now I had the advantage of being at the front, I also instructed him on how to deploy the two sections, because I had one section with me. So immediately those soldiers disembarked and they joined the other soldiers and they repulsed the al-shabaab. We set up a cordon. However, my commanders on the ground realized that I was not with them. And that is because in war, when you have a situation like that, the first thing you're taught to do is conduct a very quick assessment of your body. So I moved my limbs, but on my right limb I could feel this searing heat, and I couldn't move it. But still, my cabin was filled with soot and the vision was not very clear. So one of the corporals, the section commander, he's called Corporal Kaino. Corporal Kaino, after now they had set up what we call an all-round defense, came back to the APC where I was with a private soldier called Langat. So they opened the APC door, and by this time you have to understand, from the injury that I had gotten, I was losing copious amounts of blood and I could feel my body weakening. And when they opened the door and some of the dust blew out, I sort of lifted my head and I was met with this gory picture of part of my melted boot and bone and blood smeared on the roof of the APC. I immediately knew that there was a problem. So Kaino looked at my leg, he looked at me and he asked, what can I do? So I told him, we need to stem this blood. He immediately reached for his tourniquet and they applied the tourniquet around where I was injured, just to first of all stem the blood. The initial plan was for me to be taken out of the APC and laid down next to a tree that was within the perimeter that we had secured, as we called the team that we were supposed to meet to come and reinforce us.
How far are they at this time?
So by this time I estimated that they were at least 15 minutes out, because we were not going to meet and stay there. And so by my estimation, because we were 5 kilometers short of where we were supposed to meet, I also estimated that this team was 15 minutes out. But as they carried me out of the APC, I assessed that I was still losing quite an amount of blood, and I made a decision that if I was going to lie under that tree, chances are I would not make it back to camp. So I called Sergeant Maina, who was my second in command, gave him instructions about radioing the second team to come and reinforce us. Then I also told the radio operator to radio the tactical headquarters, which was now in Busar, and describe the situation so that they could start organizing for casualty evacuation, something in the military called CASEVAC. And so as all this was happening, Sergeant Kito, my driver that I was with in the same vehicle, he had suffered some superficial injuries, rushed back to one of the APCs and brought it forward, the very last one. So I was loaded onto the APC with a couple of soldiers, and we took one of the fighting vehicles with the troops from Somali National Army, and we set on our journey back. So essentially I left Sergeant Maina in charge of the troops now, and we had the second team that was coming to reinforce them. And so we started our journey back to Busar.
Let me cut you short. We'll talk about the journey back to Busar.
Yes.
At this time inside the APC, you've not realized you have injuries. You've not even felt the heat just yet. And you're doing commands still in this APC. When you've asked Sergeant Kito whether he's okay, and he tells you he's okay, but you're still issuing commands. What is inspiring you at this moment?
So at this particular moment, you have to realize that, again, the way we are trained as in the Kenya Defense Forces is that you look after your brother. And remember, these people are my second family. And so aside from my training, it is also a natural reaction, sort of, because if something were to happen to your brother, assuming that you are close with your brother or your sister, then the natural reaction or your natural disposition towards that would be to care for them first, okay? And so even this time, in spite of the excruciating pain that I was going through, my mind was set on ensuring that we do not suffer any further casualties and that the situation is contained. And that is why I set about doing all these things.
Are there any other officers who have injuries at this point of attack? Other than you say Sergeant Kito had small injuries?
Yes.
Is there any other officer who had been injured?
Fortunately, no. Fortunately, no. Because the way we had organized the convoy was such that we had certain considerations that would ensure if we drove into an ambush, not the entire convoy would be compromised, okay? And so we are lucky that even the explosion occurred on my side of the cabin, so that I was the only one who was incapacitated at this particular moment. So that for me, in fact, was a positive, because you can imagine if I had to take care of myself and also take care of another injured soldier, it would have been a Herculean task on my end.
Right. I'm wondering, inside this APC, going back to camp for all this distance, and you're feeling the pain in your leg, what is going through your mind?
Well, there were two key things that were running through my mind at that particular moment. The first one was the state of the troops that I had just left behind. Remember, I am the commander of this platoon that is on the ground, okay? And of course, the thoughts running through my head are these people reinforcing? Has the team already arrived? And I have no means of communicating to them. The second thing was I could feel my body going into shock. And like I said, because I was very aware now of the extent of my injury, at least the foot injury, and the amount of blood that I was losing, at some point I was very convinced that I might not make it. And in fact, at one point I called one of the privates, Langat. Remember the Langat who opened the door with Corporal Kaino? They're the same people I had in my APC. And I motioned for him to come closer to me because I was also losing my voice. So I told him, just in the event that I do not make it, I don't want you to break this news to my parents first. I told him I want you to break the news to my sister, because I know my sister is the stronger one in the family, and this is my younger sister. So I told him I want you to break this news to my sister, and then she will know how to tell it to my parents. And of course Langat was trying to encourage me, telling me, no, sir, you will make it. It's not that bad. I was like, yes, I know I will make it, because I also don't want to make my soldier panic. I told him I know I will make it, but just in case. And I also gave him other details of things that he was to do. And by this time, the APC was like an oven. It was really hot. And I could tell because the rest of the crew was sweating, but I was shivering. And at some point, they wanted to remove my fragmentation jacket, and I told them no. Actually, I just need more, But yes, thank God we made it back to Busar.
Okay. And
that is where now I started getting proper medical attention.
And now you have the evacuation team ready?
Yes, so immediately I got there. I had found that they had requested for an airlift for me. So there were helicopters that were on the way to take me from Busar. And I was going to be taken to, the plan was to take me from Busar to Elwak. And then from Elwak, I would be loaded onto a fixed wing aircraft that would now take me to Wilson. And from Wilson, I'd be driven to Defense Forces Memorial Hospital.
Why all the, being taken to Elwak, then fixed wing to Wilson? There's no way you would have been brought straight from Busar to Nairobi?
You know, Busar is an active conflict zone, and you need appropriate transportation from that conflict zone to an area that now you can be properly managed. And so that is why the choppers had been called. So I was airlifted from Busar. But you have to remember, all this while, I have now started receiving medical attention, which has, by the time I'm in Busar, they've already stemmed the blood, they've stabilized my wound, and then now I'm taken to Elwak. In Elwak, you have a medical doctor there also who is just looking at my condition, and everyone is doing their bit in ensuring that I'm as stable as possible for now my transfer to Defense Forces Memorial
The medical
Hospital.
doctor who is treating you at Elwak, are they officers from the Kenya Defense Forces, or what type of a doctor is treating you at Elwak?
Yes, these are personnel from the Kenya Defense Forces, and it's a manner of our deployment. Every combat team moves with its own medical team. Yes, but because of course also of the nature of operations, you find that it's like operating with the different levels of hospital. So this is like the first area where you're tended to. Then when you go to the FOB or the forward operating base, that is Elwak, you'd find you probably have more equipment, more medicine and things like that.
All right.
Yeah.
From Elwak now you're coming to Wilson Airport. For many people probably in such an incident, they would start feeling sorry for themselves. But I'm imagining as a soldier, you're trying to encourage yourself. How are you encouraging yourself? The journey to Elwak, coming towards Wilson.
Well, luckily, I only had to encourage myself after the journey, because I was injected, I was pumped with enough painkillers that knocked me out. So I just kept having brief glimpses of my station at that particular moment. So I remember I briefly woke up when I was in Elwak. Then I slumped back into unconsciousness. The next time I woke up, I was in the aircraft. And I could tell because I could see the railings and the setup on the window. And I remember just waking up briefly, long enough to just ask for water.
This is in the fixed wing?
This is in the fixed wing.
Okay.
So I woke up long enough to ask for some water. And before the medical orderly could even respond, I slumped back to unconsciousness. Next time I woke up, I was in Wilson. And I could hear the sirens, and I knew I had landed because of the wind at the airport, and I could hear the propeller noises, and I could see the blue, I could hear the sirens from the ambulances. Slumped back into unconsciousness. The next time I woke up was at Defense Forces Memorial Hospital. And for me, this is the first time I actually experienced PTSD, because as I was being stretchered from the ambulance, there's a bit of an open space between where the ambulance stops and the entry to the hospital. And I remember looking at the doctors wearing their white lab coats, and we are in the open, and I am wondering, why aren't these people using a covered approach? Why are these people not in camouflage? And I sat up on the stretcher and asked for my weapon, because now my head is telling me I need something to protect us with. So I asked the person, the nurse who was pushing my stretcher, I asked him, where is my weapon? And he said something about my weapon being in the armory and whatnot. And I remember thinking, this man is not serious. So I sat up in the stretcher and asked him, where's my weapon? I want it now. They had to stop the entire process. And someone came and explained to me that now I'm in a safe area, that this is a military camp, it is guarded, and that I did not need my weapon. And the next time I woke up, I was told I had been in the ICU for a whole week.
You talked about PTSD when you're going in. From the ICU, do you have instances of PTSD that you have to deal with after that?
Yes. You see, PTSD is not just a momentary occurrence. This is a process. The same way it sets in, it takes time before PTSD sets in, and sometimes it happens, especially if you experience such violent instances. But it takes time before you can get rid of it, before you can overcome it. Not really get rid of it, before you can overcome this. Okay, and for me, I'm just fresh from the battlefield, and my mindset, my body, everything is set for war, is set for battle. So my mind and my body still cannot differentiate between a peaceful location and a conflict region. It is on the ready, and that is why everything I would say I would do was geared towards protection, towards security.
Every time your reaction to anything was about protection?
Every time. The worst was a reaction to loud noises because of the explosions, because of the gun battles. So any time you would hear a loud bang, you would either wake up with a start, jump, or duck and whatever. Because some of these reactions are now become a part of you, because that's how you survive in a conflict zone. Your body has to learn to react before even your mind thinks through the situation, and that is what kept occurring.
There's something about, you talk about chaplain and see the fathers and the priests. Tell us the importance of faith in a journey like yours.
Well, faith is an interesting topic because you first have to believe. You first have to believe, and it is important, especially for your mind, for the healing of your mind. When you believe that there is a higher power than yourself, then you also get to have confidence that this same higher power is for my good. Okay? And so whenever the chaplaincy would come, and I have to tell you, I am a Christian. I would study the Bible, I would pray by myself. And so I had an understanding of what God says in His Word about healing, about His protection, about life generally. And so just having the clergy visit and us saying all these prayers, making all these prayers, was really key for my mental health. So this, coupled with the psychologists who would come to talk to me, I think is one of the things that really helped me overcome the instances of PTSD that I was suffering at the moment. Yes.
Very interesting. As we wind up, there our officers still in Somalia, 10 years on, and helping the country called Somalia to stabilize under AMISOM. And I'm sure you're an inspiring story to them. What would be your word to the officers, particularly from the Kenya Defence Forces, who are doing this noble duty of stabilizing Somalia alongside other forces within AMISOM?
Thank you very much, John. That's actually a very important question. I have no doubt that my fellow officers are very clear in their mind about the reasons why we went to Somalia in the first place. Because remember, Somalia, we share quite an extensive border with Somalia. And so insecurity in Somalia eventually impacts on security in Kenya. And our task as KDF, drawing from our mandate to defend and protect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of this country, that is the solemn oath of a soldier, of an officer. And we are all very clear about this. And so what I would say is just to encourage them that we have a beautiful country, and more so we have beautiful people. Kenyans are amazing, I will tell you. And these are things that are worth fighting for. I love that the defense strategic vision right now is mission readiness, and it is spurred on by the dictum sharpening the arrowhead. In other words, we are working, the Kenya Defence Forces is working towards training its soldiers better, equipping its force better, so that we are better equipped to respond to contemporary environment, contemporary security environment, which is impacted by things now like, for example, environment. You see, this is an area where KDF is a thought leader. So I just want to encourage my fellow officers, my fellow soldiers, that we are on the right track. That this fight for our country, even though now we have switched to AMISOM, which is basically trying to stabilize Somalia, it is absolutely worth it. The sacrifices that we have made, the sacrifices that we continue to make are worth it.
Of course, speaking to Lt.Colonel David Wando, a war hero in Somalia, now heading the environment portfolio in the Kenya Defence Forces. And thank you very much, sir, for speaking to us. Such a courageous journey. God bless you as you keep doing what you're doing. Asante sana.
Thank you very much.
Keep watching KBC, because indeed, Kenya is watching.